So welcome today. Thank you so much for being here. We are doing Unlocking the Potential of AWS Cost Explorer, and we have Bryce Dickens here with us today. He is a senior financial analyst with the AWS FAST team. He is currently working with some of our local business, local government, and state government, other government agencies. But before that, he worked with some of our largest accounts. So he's got a lot of experience in this area and has done a lot of demos of Cost Explorer for customers, showing them how to use it to find and analyze what they're doing. And so as we do this next slide, what we design each one of these around some of those common questions that people like Bryce get asked in those day-to-day meetings. So how do I get visibility into my spend? What tool should I use? How could I use it? Is Cost Explorer only a visibility tool, or is there more to it? I think the most important part of this call is actually, how do I use Cost Explorer to get more insight into my portfolio? How does it integrate with other services? And what are some areas where I can't use Cost Explorer? So what's it good for, but also, when might I need another solution? And so as we're going through this, we know from the poll that we had earlier, there's some of you who are, this is very new to you. As you go through, use this as an introduction, what the options are possible, sort of how you put together using it. For those of you who are using it infrequently, Bryce has got some great tips on how to actually do that analysis and use Cost Explorer to go that next level deeper. So I'm going to go ahead and let him, also as just a reminder, we will do live Q&A at the end, but if you have questions as we go ahead and type them in as you're thinking of them. We've got people in the background who can help answer those questions, as well as we'll take some of them into that live Q&A. So thank you so much, Bryce, for being here, and I'll let you go ahead and take over with the agenda.
All right, I appreciate it. So thank you everybody for joining. We know that there are plenty of opportunities that you have to divert your attention to other things, but you've chosen to be here with us. And for that, we truly appreciate it. Today, we're going to be offering a little bit of something for everyone, especially based on the poll results that we saw. If this is your first exposure to Cost Explorer, congratulations. We're going to cover that within the first 10 to 15 minutes. We're going to dive deep into Cost Explorer today. So once we start introducing Cost Explorer and all the different facets of what the tool can offer, we're then going to take that skill set and start applying it to specific services in a use case driven approach. So for example, we'll take a look at S3. We'll take a look at specifically within S3, how you can start to break apart the usage of that service to really try to dig in and find where have you been successful and where potentially are those other areas that you could start to drive optimization within S3. We then switch gears a bit and we switch to a different use case for CloudWatch. In a lot of my experiences with customers, that can tend to be a black box. And people want to start opening that up to see, okay, how am I consuming CloudWatch? And if I can understand how I'm consuming the service, what then do I do to help drive a conversation with the owner of that resource to drive optimization? And we'll cover that as well from opportunities that you have there. And lastly, we're going to start covering the extensibility that Cost Explorer brings to your cloud financial management portfolio. Certainly within AWS, Cost Explorer is only one facet of a multitude of tools that we have deployed freely for you so that you can really have a robust cloud financial management practice. And in this case, we'll be taking a look at anomaly detection and how that starts to work with Cost Explorer. So without further ado, diving into exactly what is Cost Explorer, one of the things that hopefully you'll get from this experience is, while yes, we have prepared content in terms of PowerPoints, I'm not a general fan of PowerPoints. As much as I can, we're going to jump actually into usage of the tool. And as much as you want to, please follow along in your own environment. I'll show you how you can get logged in to that service and how you can go ahead and start seeing some of the screens that I'll be looking at. In general, Cost Explorer is your one-stop shop to get visibility into your portfolio of spend. And certainly for our users that access this on an infrequent basis, that may be how you're using it today. You're going in on a monthly basis, a quarterly basis, an annual basis to take a look at your consumption, try to understand maybe some usage patterns, and then trying to make determinations about what, from a future forecast perspective, your consumption will look like. The good news is Cost Explorer is going to do much more than that for you. And maybe what we'll see today in some of these use case driven approaches is a novel way to use Cost Explorer that maybe historically you have not used. So if this is your first exposure, we're going to give you that skill set. And then in those use cases, you'll see immediately how you can start applying that newfound knowledge that you have. This meeting is recorded. And so what we want to provide is, let's say that you're going to go back to your desk, or you're going to go back to your teammates, and you're going to say, hey, look at this, I've got this wonderful recording, and you want to help them repeat a lot of what we're going to be doing. This is that step process that you can walk them through. Or if you want to reference later, a quick reference guide for you to remember different ways to get familiarity with Cost Explorer, you can step through these as well. And I would be remiss if we didn't leave you with something and further content to read. And this is what we have here. We have several blog posts that talk about Cost Explorer, as well as different getting started blogs that take different approaches of different flavors than what we'll be covering today. So that's going to be there for your viewing pleasure. And without further ado, we're going to go ahead and jump right on into Cost Explorer itself. A couple things that I want to reiterate. We do have time apportioned at the end for dedicated Q&A, but if you have a question that comes up, please put that in the chat. Let us go ahead and see that. Let's go ahead and register that, and maybe that we can answer that question for you already, so we have people monitoring those questions. That way, because I know a personal preference for me is, I hate it when you get this question in your mind and you can't get it out until you get the question asked. And I would hate that you miss the majority of the content that we have prepared today because that one question is still lingering back there. So please go ahead and ask it. We'll see if we can get it answered for you. If not, we'll save that to the end and make sure we cover that in the dedicated time. All right, thanks folks. Let's go ahead and jump on in. So what I'm doing here is I've gone into Cost Explorer, and this is the home view. Now, if this is your first time logging into AWS, how you can find Cost Explorer is go to the top search bar and just type in Cost Explorer. Okay, of course, it would help if you can spell. There we go. And now we can see Cost Explorer as a service. You can click that, and this is the view that you're going to be getting. To help orient you to the service, you're always going to see current month cost as well as forecasted. So I want to call that out because sometimes you're going to see two drastic numbers. In this case, because we're still early in October, you're going to see quite a change in those numbers. We're almost halfway there, so we're seeing almost a doubling, or a third of the way, which will get us to 1,800 from the 639 that we're at today. If this is your first orientation to CloudWatch, or I'm sorry, Cost Explorer as well, try to take a look at your trends. What Cost Explorer is doing on the back end is natively combing through your usage and helping to call out some things that may have slipped or may have changed since the last time you were here. It's a great resource. Again, this is all free. So go ahead and start leveraging this from a training perspective to help draw your attention to maybe something to help get you started in that analysis process of using Cost Explorer. To get to the beautiful graphs that we saw earlier in the screenshots, you would click Cost Explorer here on the left, and the default view is going to be the last 6 months grouped by service. So we can see here, and what we're looking at, this is my personal consumption internally within AWS, and you can see some of the services that I've deployed in support of my job and what I do to help customers. Okay, so you can see some of the services I've deployed. You can change these graphs to a stacked view, as well as if you're looking for trend information to see, hey, for example, there was a sharp downturn in my EC2 instance cost. So this is where a line graph would really come into play, because you don't necessarily see that here in this chart that we're looking at when a stacked bar chart. So it's a really good example to help catch a trend before it's too late. By default, we said it was going to be 6 months. This is a rolling 6 months or a trailing 6 months view. If you want to set that to an absolute view of I only ever want to see April through September, anytime I come into Cost Explorer, you're going to want to go ahead and switch to the absolute view and go ahead and click into the date range. And this is where you have the opportunity to set your specific dates. Now you can, in this case, for example, click from your start to your finish, and that would set the date in this case for just the month of May. Alternatively, if you wanted a different date, you could enter in the dates here for a start and end date. One caveat I do want to throw out there is it's only going to be for the last 12 months. So if you're looking for the last 18 months, unfortunately, there's going to be a cap at the 12-month mark. So you wouldn't be able to go on beyond the last 12 months of usage. Now, anytime you make a selection, you always want to make sure you click apply and now we can see that taking effect. But the graph looks a little weird, right? And that's because we only selected 1 month, and it's going to spread that over the viewing plane here. Well, let's say we want to say a daily view. So all you have to do is granularity, click daily, and now we can see that cost as it was incurred on each day of the month in May. I do have another option available, and that is a paid feature, and that is for an hourly view. Now that hourly view will be shrink down to the last 14 days. So you'll see here, I'm going to get an error, and it's going to say, oh, in the last 14 days of usage. If you click enable, it's going to go ahead and default to the last 14 days of consumption. And because I've still got my group by set here for service, you can see here the services that allow for hourly viewing. And so in this case, it's pretty restricted to just OpenSearch, in this case, in EC2 instances. There are use cases of why you would want to use hourly compute. We won't necessarily go into that today, but if that's something that is of interest to you, you can change that simply by going down here to preferences on the left, selecting that, and checking that box for hourly and resource level data. One pro tip that I want to throw out is while you're here looking at your preferences, you want to make sure that you go ahead and check the box for receiving EC2 right sizing recommendations. The reason for that is, one, it's a free service. Two, it takes about 24 hours to populate, which is in the same case of Cost Explorer. So if this was your first time ever to see Cost Explorer and you went to the service and you didn't see anything there, that's because as soon as you access Cost Explorer for the first time, it takes about 24 hours for the data to populate. Same case here with right sizing recommendations. So your future self will thank your past self by enabling that historically, so that any time that you find is the right time, you can enable that and then immediately view those recommendations by clicking right sizing recommendations here on the left. And if we ever wanted to see our right sizing recommendations, now we can see where those are populating for us. Back in Cost Explorer, if you historically were using it, you're going to notice that this UI is a little bit different. That's because there was a UI update last Wednesday. So this may be a little new for you. So that's what we're going to spend some time here for just a few minutes talking about the group by and the filtering. You can see in the chart, I've grouped my consumption based upon the service that was used, but you could easily switch to region just by hitting the drop down, selecting region, and now I can see my consumption as it relates to the region it was consumed. Okay, so we can see predominantly I'm using Northern Virginia. But let's say I wanted to focus specifically on a service. We would go down here to dimension, hit the drop down, we would see service as an option. We're going to leave that as include, and we're going to select S3. Now, as much as I can, I tried to be efficient with my time. So instead of scrolling through the entire list of services, you can just type a name, in this case, S3. I'm going to select that. I'm going to apply that filter. And now I can see my consumption only for S3 according to region. And you can see here in this case, I'm only deploying to one region. You can set multiple filters. So let's say that you wanted to add another filter or looking at a specific account or specific tag. You can do all of that here just by selecting, for example, that option, choosing the tag that you want to look for. In this case, I want to look for only stuff associated with the lab that I completed. So I'm going to select 200 lab, apply the filter, and now I'm seeing that as it relates to S3, I did not incur any charges related to the 200 lab. But what if I'm curious if I incurred it in other areas outside of S3? Simply just remove the filter, and now I can see I did incur costs in the Oregon region. And if I'm curious as to which services, then I would just simply switch back to a service grouping. And now I can see that apparently I deployed EC2 instances as part of that lab. Now this chart here that we see is a breakdown of the graph. So we can see the data that is supporting the chart. All of this can be easily downloaded. So for example, I downloaded it just now, and we can see that at any point I could just open it, and all of that data is there just as it was in Cost Explorer. Now we won't get into some of the advanced options. Certainly with a 200 or 300 level course, We'd go into much more granular detail, and there's a lot more to Cost Explorer as it relates to grouping and filtering and so forth. Some of that we'll see today to help drive value, but this is the basics of Cost Explorer. How you can set your absolute date range, how you can change the range of months that you're looking at, how you can change the granularity, how you can alter if you want to look into the future from a forecasting perspective, and then how you group and set those filters to really start dialing in exactly what you want to look for. So that is Cost Explorer. We spent the first few minutes here just making sure we established a lot of the basics, and now we're going to jump into some use cases as it relates to identifying cost opportunities, cost optimization opportunities within Cost Explorer itself. To start, we wanted to talk about S3. And really, in order to understand where to save money with S3 for any service, we first have to start with how is the service charged. With S3, there are three main components of how you would incur a charge. One is just purely using the service to store data objects. You would choose what storage class you'd want, and then you'd want to maybe tier that. So for example, in S3 standard storage, there are tiers depending on tiered pricing based upon how much you're storing within S3. Once the data objects are there, you're going to be moving that data around internally within S3 as well as externally. You're going to be calling into S3, looking at the data objects, and then potentially exfiltrating them for use elsewhere in the portfolio. And then to help you manage all the stuff that's going on in S3, you would potentially deploy some of these services in support of your S3 opportunity. So those are the three different areas of how you would consume that. And it follows a typical lifecycle of object, right? You're going to take that object, put it into S3, retrieve it maybe for some machine learning algorithms that need to be trained or so forth. And then what we want to do is start analyzing what you've done historically to inform what you're in the future going to be doing with your data objects. And this is where Cost Explorer starts to shine. Cost Explorer allows you to understand historically what has happened from a consumption pattern perspective so that we can inform the future of how we store objects within S3 to help drive optimization. I'm only going to throw this as a reference here. During the presentation, I'm going to be referencing colder storage opportunities. These are the different storage classes within S3 that are offered today, each having their own unique characteristics and requirements. We won't go into detail here about this, but this will be a reference that you can come back to later for when we start talking about colder storage options to try to bring context to what we're going to be looking at inside of Cost Explorer. So with that, we're going to go back into Cost Explorer. As I mentioned, I don't like PowerPoints. I want to, as much as we can, demo the actual capabilities that we're talking about. So we were talking about S3, so that's what I'm going to do first, is I'm going to add a filter for a service, S3. I'm going to apply that filter, and to really understand where or how I'm consuming S3, instead of grouping by service, I want to group by usage type. And now I can start to see exactly how I'm being charged for S3. We're going to see the primary component is tier 3, followed by charges related to usage of storage lens and the different storage classes of how I'm storing data within S3. Now, if this is your first time seeing this, understandably, it could be pretty confusing, especially when we see something like request tier 3, because historically, if you didn't have experience with Cost Explorer, you may not understand exactly what that charge type is or how it's being incurred. The good news is there are a couple things that we can offer to help. If you're coming from looking at your example bill, in the billing console for the S3 service, right? So I'm here looking at my billing console. I'm looking at a previous invoice, in this case, the current invoice for this month. And I'm going to scroll down to S3, Simple Storage Service, primarily in Northern Virginia. And we can start to see, for example, tier 1. And we can see that it's related to puts, copies, posts. we can see tier 2 is related to the GET requests. These start to shed light into how we're consuming S3 or how or why. If you need a further example, you could go to the pricing page for S3. The reason why we're spending a lot of time here specifically on S3 and how it's priced is because this process of what we're using in Cost Explorer to look at usage type and going to look at the bill, we're going to looking at the pricing page for the service, you can apply that process to any service. So later when we talk about CloudWatch, we're not going to be going and looking at the pricing page, but you could do that. We're not going to be looking at the pricing page for EFS or for EC2, but if those services come up, you could just as easily go to that pricing page, look at how that's being priced out, so that when you see a usage type of S3 standard consumption, or here for a request for those put copies, or those gets and selects, you can start to see specifically the rate that you're being charged per storage class. And from that knowledge, we can start linking back to what we're seeing here in Cost Explorer. So we can see those requests tier 1, the bill told us that was a put copy post. And now we can go here to our request pricing feature and look for the get and posts. Now, some of this still may be a little bit deep for you. Some of this, especially if you're brand new to Cost Explorer, may be in the realm of areas that you're not comfortable with. The good news is there is a document that outlines all of the different usage types for S3. So for example, if we're looking here, as it relates to time storage, it doesn't tell us necessarily the region of where that consumption is taking place. So we can go over here to this document and see that, for example, where there is no regional prefix, that is understood to be Northern Virginia region. So when I see this, I know that is storage in the Northern Virginia region. And more importantly, I can search this document for timed storage. And I can see here that time storage in bytes per hour is the number of is the amount of gigabytes that I'm storing in S3 standard storage. So if I go back to my handy data reference chart, I can see here that I'm using this storage class S3 standard. And based on what I can see in Cost Explorer, I know that that's the Northern Virginia region. So that's how we start piecing all of this together by leveraging Cost Explorer. And Cost Explorer in one view can tell us all of that. I know the region, I know the storage class type, and I know how much it's costing me. But we're gonna go one level deeper. So here we're seeing it's a request tier 3. Now, even in the billing console, it's not going to show up as tier 3. This is where you have to go back to the handy data reference chart, and we're going to type in tier 3. And we can see that there's a couple of options, but this isn't exactly matching what I'm seeing because this has a GDA notation. I'm looking for just pure tier 3. And what I can see here is these are lifecycle requests moving data objects into the Glacier Flexible Retrieval storage class. So if I'm interested in optimizing with S3, the good news is I've just started to find an area that I want to dive into because I want to understand if it has been beneficial historically. Someone or some entity within my portfolio has moved data objects from a standard storage tier or other storage class into S3 Glacier Flexible Retrieval. And to illustrate that, in my reference chart, someone or some entity has taken objects that were in these other storage classes and have moved them into this storage class. And we see that because we're getting a charge related to it. So that's how we know it's going on. Okay. And the question is, was that the right decision? One of the ways to answer that is by going back into Cost Explorer. And we're going to be looking for a charge related to getting data out of Glacier. So how we try to see if there's a charge related to Glacier, we're going to go back to our reference chart and we're going to type in Glacier. And now we can start to see all of the different options related to getting data out of Glacier. And particularly, we can see restore requests for flexible retrieval. That would show up as a tier 5 or a tier 6. What this means is that someone has moved the object into Glacier and then they're trying to get it out. The economics behind Glacier are such that that storage is intended for people to put stuff in and then not bring it back out. Because Glacier is there for data objects that need to hang around town for a very long time due to business requirements, regulatory requirements, or so forth. But if you're constantly accessing that data object in those buckets, it becomes uneconomical. So we want to see if that's the case. We want to see if people are putting the objects through a tier 3 request into S3 and then subsequently getting them out. So let's go look. So here, we're going to scroll down and we're going to look for requests. Now here, we can see that from a usage type perspective, I'm not seeing anything related to a tier 5 or a tier 6 request. This answers for me the question to know that whoever is transitioning the objects into flexible retrieval for Glacier, whoever is doing that knew what they were doing because they're not accessing those objects. Because if they were, we would see a tier 5 and tier 6 requests. So whoever's done that has made the right decision, which then allows you to say, are there other areas where we could be moving more data objects into S3 Glacier? A good opportunity to start is with this standard storage. And now that we can see who is running, or see that I am running standard storage, we're going to set a filter for that. So we're going to set a filter for usage type. And you can quickly type in timed storage. And we're going to select all of those standard storage objects. Now, how did I know that those were standard storage objects? Again, because I can go to this area and find out for the standard storage area, what type of usage types am I looking for? Then I can go back to Cost Explorer and set that filter. Now, based on my experience, that's just how I know. And so that's what we see here. And because I've set that, what I can do now is set group by, and I'm going to go down to tag, where I've tagged my buckets with the name. And now I know which teams I need to go talk to who are using standard storage. Because what I can talk to them about is to say, I've got data that proves that we can successfully move objects to a colder storage option, and it's economical to do that because we're not getting objects out. I'd like to talk to you as the owner of this bucket. So whoever owns spot stream data, I want to talk to you about your bucket because I'd like to go ahead and move that into a colder storage option. And then you can build the business case because now you have the pricing page. So you know the pricing differentials between the different storage classes. And now you can build a business case to say, here's how many gigabytes I have, and here's how I can move it to a colder storage class. So in this use case for S3, just to recap what we've done, we've gone in, we've grouped by the different usage types. We've understood how we could bring different data sets. For example, whether we're looking at the invoice, whether we're looking at the pricing page, or whether we're looking at the different usage types, we could bring all of that information to bear contextually into Cost Explorer to help us figure out how we're consuming the service, find where we've successfully used the service for cost optimization, and then identify through a tag other areas that we potentially could target to move into colder storage. And that's the use case for S3. So I'll go ahead and take a pause Because what we're going to be doing is switching gears just a moment. Okay, we're going to be switching to the CloudWatch service. Now, what I mentioned about the CloudWatch service is that for that, we're not going to be necessarily going looking at the pricing pages. We're not going to be going as in depth, right? Because we've already learned through a skill set that we could do that with S3. The same principle is going to apply for CloudWatch. So in order to reset, I'm going to clear the filters. I'm going to go back into my service of CloudWatch. I'm going to apply that filter. And now we're seeing how I'm consuming CloudWatch based on usage type. Now, some of this, if S3 was challenging from a usage type perspective, CloudWatch is even more opaque in terms of trying to understand, okay, how is the service being consumed and how are we leveraging that? One of the things that I want to offer to help you in your journey, especially when it talks to optimization, is a reference chart or a blog post that was out there that references for each specific type of usage that you have within CloudWatch, how could you, from a resolution standpoint, drive optimization or efficiency for that particular use case? So here, because we're talking about CloudWatch for my account, I want to zero in on this time storage. Certainly, there's a lot of other areas that you could drive optimization, but to really just help keep things simple, I want to talk about this usage type for time storage. Contextually, what's going on within CloudWatch is I have a bunch of resources, EC2, S3, and those are all generating telemetry data. It's telling me how much of this resource is being used. It's telling me different options around operational information to tell me the throughput or the memory utilization or the CPU utilization for each of the services. It's telling me if the service is healthy or not. There's a lot of information coming in about that service, and it's coming into CloudWatch. Once that information is there, it's going to be stored in CloudWatch, and that's why I'm receiving a storage charge. It's because there's telemetry data about my environment being piped into CloudWatch, and it's being stored there. So if we go look at time storage inside of this chart, we'll see that time storage is related to logging, and we can see that here. Now you'll see there's a lot of other verbiage too. One of the unique things about CloudWatch is that in addition to a usage type grouping, you could do an API operation. And it has to do with how CloudWatch can be used. CloudWatch is a service and you're piping data into it, but then you need to access that data. And one of the ways that you either pipe in data or access the data are through API calls. So we won't necessarily go into the technology of what an API call is, but that would be another grouping that you could do. So for example, here, we're going to see that API operation is another group by feature. So if I select that, now I'm seeing things related to logs, storage, specifically as it relates to a service, and I can see other types of items. These API operations map directly to the usage types that we just saw. So where we saw region time storage, that's the same as seeing hourly storage metering. So if we go back to Cost Explorer, I can see that here. So where I see hourly storage metering from an API operation standpoint, that tells me that that's really timed storage, storage of a log. Now that we have that context, we're going to scroll to the bottom and it's going to tell us for those logs, how do we optimize? So we know it's related to CloudWatch logs, and how do we optimize? One of the things that it will tell you, now there's obviously a lot going on. There's a lot more detail here, but for this very narrow use case, for this demonstration, we're going to look at how you save with CloudWatch, specifically with logs. One of the things that you need to do is look at your retention policy for your log groups. And that's because the default is set to never expire. Now, because CloudWatch is a regional-based service, if I know I want to go ahead and tackle that inside of CloudWatch, I need to know the region. So I'm going to go ahead and set a filter for hourly storage metering. I'm going to add a filter, dimension, and we're going to go into API operation. And we're going to say, for hourly storage metering, apply the filter, and instead of group by, I'm going to do region. And now I know which region I need to go look at inside of CloudWatch. So in this case, I need to go to Northern Virginia. So here in the search, I'm going to type in CloudWatch. And here within CloudWatch, based on what this is telling me, is I need to go look at my log groups and look at the retention periods. So here on the left, I'm going to see logs. I'm going to see log groups. And while that's loading, we're going to see it populate and tell me for each of the log groups, what is the retention period? So we can see the log groups here. And then we can see that the retention by default was set to never expire. So that's why over time, you've seen that my storage has continued to build and never go down. Because for the vast majority of my log groups, they've all been set to never expire. If you ever wanted to change that, you could, for example, click just to never expire and set either retention to 1 day or any option therein. Now, even though you can see that, I would encourage you to have a discussion with the owner of that log group before you make the change. For any change in the environment that could potentially have knock-on effects for other areas of the environment, in particular, you may have a business requirement to keep logs for a particular period. You may have an internal governance mechanism or an external regulatory requirement to keep logs for a particular period of time. So I'd always encourage you before you make a change on retention, make sure and validate that you're not in violation of any other area internally, but that's how you would make that change. And that's how, using Cost Explorer, you could easily identify through the usage type for hourly storage metering, how you can quickly filter down to that, group by the region, and then apply the knowledge that you learned here in this blog post with actual changes in your environment to save that money. Okay, so I mentioned earlier, we made sure that we wanted to have Q&A time. We're quickly approaching that. So in the last use case, it's actually going to be very, very simple. And it's going to look at extensibility of using Cost Explorer with other services to help really drive the maturity of your cloud financial management practice. One of the features within the cost management suite beyond Cost Explorer is anomaly detection. This is a free service that you can turn on, and I would encourage everyone to go ahead and turn that on. Again, your future self will thank your past self. One, it's a free resource. Second is the machine learning algorithm that is trying to determine what is an anomaly within your environment. That is something that you need to go through and turn on so that that machine learning algorithm has time to learn. It has time to understand your environment and the unique operating environments. So let's say that today you're already using anomaly detection. Let's say that through that you received an alert, and this came in just 2 days ago. So I came back from the weekend, I got through all my Monday emails, Tuesday morning is hit, I'm going in, I'm seeing, oh goodness gracious, there was an anomaly detection. What in the world's going on? So I'm gonna go ahead, open that up, and I can see it's related to the EFS service, or the Elastic File System service. And I'm seeing, I'm like, oh, gee whiz, like what happened? I don't know. Well, you can click this link and it takes you directly into Cost Explorer for the view that you need. So it's going to go ahead and populate here. And you can see that it went ahead and applied all of the filters. Now you can see this is the old UI. Okay, so if you want to switch to the new one, if you're on the old one and you're seeing this, you could simply click the link here. And now we're back to the view that we saw earlier. Okay, so heads up, if you're kind of a foot in both worlds and you need to switch back and forth or switch one way and learn the new way, you can simply click those links there. So I'm going to go ahead and click X. And now we're back to what we saw at the beginning of the service. Okay. Now here, when you click out of anomaly detection, it's going to go ahead and out all the filters set so that you understand this is for the EFS service in the Northern Virginia region where someone is using time storage. So again, it's going to reappear here that in order to understand how EFS is charged, please go look at the pricing page and you'll understand there, once you view that, that there are two main storage, well, there's three main storage classes. There's standard, one zone, and then for each of the standard and one zone, there's a frequent access tier and an infrequent access tier. So when I see that standard storage tier is being used, which is right here, then what I can do is reach out to the owner of the EFS system and say, hey, we noticed that there is an anomaly. We noticed that this has popped up, and we'd like to open up a discussion with you about lifecycle management policies. If you're new to lifecycle management policies, we have this link here. It'll be in the PowerPoint deck that will be provided to you. It should be in the chat here for you within go to webinar. So go look in the chat and you'll see the PowerPoints listed there. In the PowerPoints, there will be a link here to lifecycle management for EFS. This walks you through how to implement it, how to use it, okay? So back here, if you're seeing EFS being consumed, specifically with standard storage, then that's where you can go to the owner. Now, if you need help finding the owner, this is where we can leverage some experience of the tooling that we already know about within Cost Explorer. We're going to go to Group By, and we're going to go to, for example, Tag. Because let's say in the environment, anytime somebody deploys a resource, you want to make sure that they're tagging their resources with the name of who they are. So in this case, I know that this is related to the MyFS product. And we also saw that there's another one for test, but specifically the charge is related to MyFS. And we know that this is in Northern Virginia. So I could very easily go up here, type in EFS to go to the EFS service, make sure I'm in the Northern Virginia region, and I know exactly the file system I'm looking for. And there we go. We can see the name, and we can see MyFS. If we open that up, we can see that there are lifecycle management policies. So that's good. What we saw in Cost Explorer is this is a brand new EFS system that was just deployed, and we haven't hit the 30-day mark. And so these objects haven't had time to cycle into the infrequent access tier. And if that was the case, these policies would have taken over and automatically moved these files back and forth according to the appropriate storage tier. So in this use case, what we saw is there was an anomaly detection that popped up. We clicked the link. We saw in Cost Explorer what that looked like. We applied a group by feature so we could understand more contextually about who or what was consuming that service. We then went into the service and, armed with the knowledge that we had about EFS, understood that in this case, the owner did the right thing. So what we can do is we can go back into anomaly detection. We can edit to say, hey, actually, this is not an issue. Yes, it was an anomaly. Yes, historically, we didn't do anything with EFS, but it was expected because we talked to the team. We understood they knew what they were doing. We're going to submit. And now we've been able to see how anomaly detection fully integrated with Cost Explorer. We covered a lot of ground. We talked about introduction to Cost Explorer. If that was your first time seeing this, we showed you how you could manipulate dates, how you could do a group by and a filtering function. And then we used that skill set to then, from a use case perspective, see how S3 could be consumed and different ways to validate what you've done historically with S3 to see if in the future other decisions could be made with S3 standard storage. We took a look at CloudWatch and again applied contextual knowledge about how the service is consumed and ways to save with CloudWatch to analyze the portfolio of spend, identify where something could be the potential, and then went into CloudWatch to see how we could affect that change. We then looked at, in the last bit, how when you start layering in all of the different service opportunities with things like anomaly detection, AWS budgets, cost categories, those are all services that integrate natively with Cost Explorer. And in particular with anomaly detection, we saw how we got an alert, investigated it, and immediately went to that service and provided contextual knowledge about how we can save money to understand we're actually okay. So with that, that at least concludes the prepared portion. And if you can, we can go ahead and go into Q&A.
Oh, that was awesome, Bryce. I learn more every time I watch this, and I get to watch it a few times. And the replay will be available on the same actual page as with the registration page. You'll get an email with that. So anyone who wants to watch this again will have that. I believe the link to the presentation is already out there as well in the chat. So we have some questions. One of them, since it involves the demo, I'm going to have you go back to that for a second. But could you go back through how you get to the future forecast? There was a question like, just can you re-show that? It was fast. I want to see that again. So we had a question on that one. That's the first one. And then while you're getting that set up, and then I will make another comment. The new UI is coming out right this week. So some accounts are on it, some accounts aren't. If you've got multiple accounts that you own, some accounts may have it, some may not. But it is rolling out as we speak. So it's a rolling thing. They started off with only 5% of accounts, and they're now well over 50%. So more and more accounts every day. But we wanted to make sure that this recording had the longest life. So we're making sure we're on the new one.
Yes, absolutely. So one of the default native opportunities with Cost Explorer is to do forecasting and to look at, on a confidence interval basis, what does your potential consumption look like? So all you have to do is in the future, drop down, hit that, and it look out 1 month or 3 months. So in this case, if I look out 3 months, it's going to say you don't have the ability to do a group buy. Now, while you won't be able to do a group buy, we'll show you how you can still apply filtering to that. So we can see here that based on the last 6 months of consumption, looking ahead 3 months, based on this confidence interval, this is where we can reasonably expect a boundary of consumption. And this frame here is what we see as the potential forecasted usage. All right, so does that help answer that?
That answers,
certainly.
Yep.
Okay, perfect.
That answers that one. We have another question, which is, so you know that this cost has happened. Is there a way to easily get from here to who owned it, that whether it's an EC2 instance or an S3 bucket, how do you get to who owned it, like to know who to follow up with?
Depending on how you manage your environment, the first place we would always try to start is with a tagging strategy. That really is the best opportunity that you're going to have to really determine explicit ownership. With some services, we could get to a resource level specific view. In particularly with EC2, you have that ability to enable that. What you need to do is go into your preferences and make sure that you enable that option for resource level data. Now, it's not going to be for every service. Particularly, it's only going to be here for EC2 that you'll be able to see a resource level specific view. And with that view, you're only going to see the unique identifier of that EC2 instance. It's not going to tell you who owns it. The only way that you're going to get true explicit contextualization of your environment is if you tag. And not only that you tag, but you've gone separately into your billing console and enabled that tag that you're looking for. You have to enable that as a cost allocation tag. And once you do that, then you'll have the option here in the group by, or even as a filter, to find that tag and get that information, hopefully, that you're looking for. So in this case, I want to find the name, because that's the requirement I have in my environment, that if you're going to deploy a resource, you have to put a name tag on it. If we can see here, the benefit of doing that, because now I can see by owner how much I'm consuming.
Thank you. We have a follow-up. So that wouldn't get you, that's not going to get you to an email. To be emailed, you have to do, you kind of have to keep that as a backward. I know when we had Liberty Mutual talking last month and into it before that, they talk about having a data dictionary that says this tag means this group, and they keep that outside of, to kind of manage that elsewhere. Another question we have, a couple of questions about linked accounts and management accounts and who can see what and across the different accounts. So we've had questions about the only way to see multiple accounts is by having in Cost Explorer is to have it be in that management account or payer account. But then a linked account, the management account determines whether or not linked accounts can see their Cost Explorer, right? And I think there's some settings that you can enable of what they can and can't see. I think I put the link in out to everybody for that. There's been a couple other questions around. So there's some questions where we've pointed people in the answer to the cost and usage report. So can you talk a little bit about what are some of the differences in the data that's available between Cost Explorer and the CUR? We commonly call the Cost Explorer, the cost and usage report, the CUR, for those of us who do this all the time. But so cost and usage report, CUR.
Absolutely. And so my apologies, at least for timing, you'll hear me refer to it as the CUR file extensively. But as Lisa mentioned, that is formerly our cost and usage report. Now, in this case, the cost and usage report underpins or is the data feed for Cost Explorer. So Cost Explorer is essentially the visualization of a lot of the information that you're going to get in the CUR file. Some explicit differences that occur. One is in the CUR file, you're going to get a lot more granular data being represented. One of those is the resource ID of every single service. So for example, in Cost Explorer, we had the example of EFS, and we saw that there were 2 file systems being deployed inside of Cost Explorer because we did a group by on the tag of name. If I was not tagging, if I did not have that option as a group by, I personally would not be able to know how many different instantiations or file systems were deployed because I don't have a resource level view of the EFS service inside of Cost Explorer. And supplant that instead of EFS, if you're talking about S3 and you want to look at individual buckets, you can't do that. If you want to look at CloudWatch for individual log groups, that's not going to be there either, right? All the capability that I had inside of Cost Explorer to get to a resource level view was because I tagged it that way. The CUR file natively will give you resource level specific information. So not only is it going to give you the resource name, but it's going to give you all the same attributes, the usage type, the item description, the account that it was consumed in, as well as any other tags that you've enabled as a cost allocation tag will also be there in that CUR file. So it's going to be basically the underpinning data that from that provides you massive extensibility if you have a BI tool. Something like if you want to go into Athena and query that would allow you to do multiple groupings of the data in that SQL query that unfortunately you cannot do, for example, inside of Cost Explorer. Inside of Cost Explorer, you can only do, for example, one grouping at a time. So I can't see within a region a grouping of services, right? Or across my region grouping of services. I would have to filter for each region first, then I could do a group by of service. But if I have that CUR file, now the world is open to me. I can go from a SQL query in Athena, I could put that in a BI tool like QuickSight. I have a multitude of opportunities to then flexibly move that data to make it meaningful to myself.
Okay. I don't know if that was just my screen having a hard time with the voice for Bryce there. We have one last question, then we need to kind of close out. But the one question I'm going to ask is around people started creating things, and I know this is going to be like the high level advice question, but one of the things that they had a problem with is people went out and created things and tags weren't created in the beginning. What advice do you have, and how can you? I'm gonna add to their question, and actually say one extra thing, which is how could you use Cost Explorer to help find those? Like, how do I know how to remediate, and how can I quickly remediate these kinds of things? So I'm going to do this. I'm going to use the Cost Explorer analysis as a handy thing here.
No, absolutely. And so I'll talk while I'm walking here, which is always a dangerous thing. But what I would do simply to find that is I would go into my filter. I'll click on tag. I'll click on the tag that I'm wanting to ensure that people are putting on their resource, in this case, a name. And I'm going to look for something that is called uncategorized, or let's see, where is it in here? But there's going to be a category that is, oh, here it is, it's at the top, no tag. And all you have to do is apply that filter. And now I can understand the different services. So I'm using my group by feature here. I can go into the region. I can go into the linked account structure. I could go into, for my EC2 fleet, I could look at the individual resource IDs. So you have all extensibility to determine that if you have your cost categories set up, you could even do the grouping to understand which potential owner of a cost category is not being tagged. So that's how you would find that very quickly. How you would address that, I would say best case tool that you have is Tag Editor. That's going to enable you at large to across a whole host of resources. You can filter for those that are not tagged and easily edit the tags so that they are tagged at that point.
Okay. All right. Then I think if you can go back to the presentation has a slide with resources in it that I know it's available for download, as well as all of the links that Bryce talked about, as well as our upcoming events. We have Peer Connect next week with Nielsen talking about the Cloud Intelligence Dashboard, which is based on that cost and usage report. So if you're thinking about you might want to start using the cost and usage report after this call, next week's session will actually go into that. We do have 2 sessions that are virtual around Peer Connect. The week after Peer Connect, week after reInvent, where you can talk with people about the things that were announced and share what we've learned from that. As well as every Thursday, there is the Twitch show for keystep optimization. But Bryce, thank you so much for being here. This has been awesome. I hope you guys enjoyed it as well. If we didn't get to your question, we will try and follow up with email. But thank you all so much for being here, and please fill out the survey as you go. And we hope to see you at another event. Thank you.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.